Well, I have a very special gift for you today. Joining me is one of the leading human behavioral specialists and personal development experts, Dr. John Demartini. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Dr. Demartini, there are so many people that wake up in the morning. They're inspired to start their day. They're ready to jump out of bed and just tackle the day with enthusiasm. But then there are so many other people who have to hit snooze 20 times, 3 cups of coffee, and they can't find the motivation to get through their day. So where do we find inspiration?
Well, I believe that people have a set of priorities, a set of values in their life, things that are most important to least important in their life. And they're unique to that individual. And whenever they feel that they're getting to fill their day and their actions in alignment with what's highest on that value list, they get up in the bed and they got the spring in their step and they're ready to go because they can't wait to get up in the morning and do what their service is. But whenever they feel that they cannot live by their highest values, or they feel subordinate to other people's influences, and they feel trapped having to do things that are not inspiring to them, then they're probably going to need a stimulus like coffee or something, sugar or something to get them up, or they'll need some sort of incentive or motivation to keep them going. So if you don't fill your day with high priority things that inspire you, it's going to keep filling up with low priority distractions that don't. One builds momentum and to make great achievement, and the other one makes you have resistance and procrastination, hesitation, frustration. And anytime you're not fulfilling your highest value, you'll automatically, because of the unfulfillment, be looking for consumerism, addictive behaviors, compulsive behaviors, immediate gratification behaviors to compensate for the unfulfillment. And this is why we overeat, this is why we do consumption of sugars and stimulants, because we're not fulfilled. Because when we're really fulfilled, we don't have time for that. We're really doing what we love doing every day.
So how do we determine what fulfills us?
Well, that's been a question I've been asking, what is it that drives people that way? And I have done my best to put together a really simple 13 questionnaire, step-by-step process to help determine what people really value. I call it the value determination process. And I look at what their life demonstrates as valuable. Because a lot of times if you ask people, what do you value, what's important to you? They'll tell you social idealisms. Kohlberg, the psychologist, said that most people are avoiding pain or seeking pleasure, subordinating to individual authorities, subordinating to collective authorities. Very few people are transcending that and being true to themselves. So when I ask people what they value, I have to get past the filters, and so I created a series of questions that help bypass those filters. How do you really fill your space? Because you fill your space with things that are important to you, and you get rid of stuff that's not important to you. How do you really spend your time? Out of a 24-hour day, what do you really do with your time? And what is the dominant use of your time? What is it that energizes you? Because when you're doing something that's valuable to you, you have more energy at the end of the day than when you started. When you're not, you're drained. What is it really organized in your life? Where are you most organized, in other words? Where do you spend your money? Because you find money for things that are important to you, and you run out of money for things that aren't. Where are you most disciplined? What are you visualizing, thinking about, and affirming to yourself about how you want your life that shows evidence of coming true? What are you conversing with others about most? And what do you keep wanting to bring the conversations to? And when you get to talk about it, you're wide awake and go. What is it that inspires you? What is it that you have as persistent and consistent goals that keep showing up in your life that you keep manifesting and you don't give up on? And also, what is it that you have that you love learning about, studying about, reading about most? If I look at those value determinants and find the answers that are most consistent in there, the most frequent, second most frequent, third most frequent, that'll give a better idea than just asking somebody blank, what are your value? It may be the same, but I find it rarely is. But when I look at what the real life demonstrates, it reveals to me what their real values are. And so I use that 13-step value determination process, which I have available for people on my website.
Fantastic, and that's been very helpful. I've gone through that process, and it's interesting though because there are a lot of people that have a lot of things going on in their life. Their desk is full of all kinds of things. They're spreading their energy out in all these different places. So how do we know to fine-tune those things, and what about those things that we should do, that we think we should do or others think we should do?
Well, anytime we subordinate to outer authority, peer pressure or individual, we'll hear ourselves in our head, I should be doing this, I ought to be doing this, I'm supposed to be doing this, I need to be doing this, I got to do this, I have to do this, I must do this. All those are imperative languages. And whenever you have imperative language, you know that that's not you speaking, That's the authority that you've injected into your life speaking. Because when you're doing something that's really you, it's I would love to do it, I choose to do it, I desire to do it, I want to do it. They're indicative languages, not imperative languages. So that's a giveaway right there that somebody outside you feel you're having to fulfill. And you're conflicting inside with what's important to you with whatever that is. Or you wouldn't be saying those language. I got to do it. So you got to listen to the language very carefully. But if you're having to feel that I've got no choice but to do it, that means that you're subordinating to somebody else and you're afraid of losing them. So as long as you put people on pedestals and infatuate with them and fear the loss of them, you're going to sacrifice what's important to you to be with them and build up resentment to break that infatuation to get yourself back to yourself again. So that's a stage that a person goes through during almost any relationship. But they can be trapped in a relationship that's a personal relationship, or it could be a business relationship, or it could be an employmentship. Anytime you subordinate to somebody else, you're going to inject their values in your life and you're going to have an internal conflict. And the injection of authority's values is what Freud called the superego, the thing that moralizes and judges you from within. So if you know those distinctions, in my book, The Values Factor, I outline those distinctions to help people know what those are so they can set themselves free of other people's expectations.
Yeah, that brings me to another question about relationships in general. As far as finding a soulmate, a lot of people want to find this one person, and they found that person, they're really in love, they're inspired by the relationship, and 2 months, 3 months later, it's over.
Well, sometimes people confuse infatuation with love. And infatuation is a dopamine stimulus, and kephalons and serotonin and oxytocin and vasopressin. It's a set of hormones that come into play that make you, goo-goo-eyed and all infatuated, and you start thinking, oh, I want to have babies with this person, I want to have a family, and it's a procreative energy. And we've confused that with real, what I call true love. And if a person doesn't know that distinction, they're going to be infatuated and have a crush on the person, and a crush means you're about to be crushed. And and I always say that anytime you fear the loss of somebody, you have a degree of infatuation. Anytime you have feelings of love for somebody, you'll feel their presence. You can't fear the loss of somebody you love. You fear the parts of them that you infatuate with. So I make, in my Breakthrough Experience program, I outline the distinctions. I give people an experience that help them make those distinctions so they're better equipped to be able to handle those emotions when they come. So most people have these infatuations and they're confusing it with love, and so they think they've got their soulmate, and then it turns out to be a heel mate. When they're tippy-toeing, when they're infatuated, they stomp on their heels when they're resentful.
Okay, so what is true love?
Well, true love is when you can finally see that the person you're with their own values, fulfilling what's important to them, is helping you fulfill yours with a balance of support and challenge. I always say that maximum growth and development occurs at the border of support and challenge, and a relationship's going to give you both. You're never going to get support without challenge. You're never going to get easy without difficulty. Whatever you're addicted to and want, the one-sidedness, the other side's going to come with it. So you're going to get kind and cruel and nice and mean and positive and negative and support and challenge and peace and war and all pairs of opposites that come. When you can finally embrace both of those equally with that person, you have more objective reasoning. You're more able to see that what they're dedicated to is serving you and what you're dedicated to is serving them. You have a more sustainable relationship. And that's never a guarantee. There's no guarantees in this thing. You can make a commitment because of some fear of some God punishing you or these kind of things. But there's no guarantee because their values are changing and so are yours. So it's a moving system. And so you have to constantly readjust and relink the values between two people to keep it active. And the ancient Greeks said if you see too many similarities at first, oh my God, we have the same number of teeth, the same number of eyes, the same number of ribs. We must be soulmates. That's a sign of infatuation. When you see more differences than similarities, we have resentment. When we have a balance between similarities and differences, we have love. And so you have to keep at the forefront of keeping that in a balanced state by asking the right questions and reflecting on what you're perceiving and how to ask questions to help you change the perceptions back into balance.
What's your opinion of marriage? Have we outgrown this in society?
Well, I think if a marriage comes in with two people that are very naive, you have a probability of about a 50-50 chance of that enduring. And I know people, I met a woman who was 94 years old that I met on our ship that was 94 and been married 5 times. She claimed that she had made love with them and they all died. All 5 deaths occurred from her lovemaking with her. So I thought that was a frisky lady. She was 94. But she'd had 5 marriages and was a very active, very ambitious, very go-getter, wealthy lady that had 30-year plans and would just climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And so she had 5 marriages at the time. I also know my grandparents made it to 101. They had 78-year marriage. And so, and I look at them and I go, I can't say one's better than the other. You know, my grandparents were a little bit more subdued. They lived in Hollywood, Florida as they retired and had kind of a subdued life. And the other one had a invigorated life. So I can't say which is good or bad or better or worse. Or I can't use a moral language on it. I can just say that both served. And so if you have this fantasy about how it's supposed to look, you're probably going to undermine the way it is because you keep comparing what it is to the fantasy instead of appreciating what it is. And it's moving around and changing, and you have to be adaptable and resilient to what it is. And if it lasts a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, or a whole life, fabulous. Did you learn something? Did you grow? So if you can have a sustainable relationship and learn how to communicate and keep that thing active and keep intimacy going, then I think that's the mastery of life. But if it doesn't, I wouldn't beat yourself up. I just go, okay, I'm learning. Did I learn from this? And I'm going on to the next thing and to go with it. And know that there'll be pains and pleasures either way you go. They're going to be there together.
Would you say that the values can even apply to relationships, values of a relationship, how it should be, right? Each person, I mean, my grandmother was married 70 years. They were very active. And she said, I said, Grandma, you know, what is the secret to having a happy marriage? And she said, you must like to do the same things, the same activities to spend time together. You must like to value the same things and also always treat your partner like they're a guest in your home.
Well, I think there's some advice on there that's good. If you respect them, you'll typically go farther than if you don't. I don't know if you'll always have the same values. I don't think that's real. I think I always say you search for somebody that has the similar values, but you always attract somebody that also has dissimilar values. I believe that the same and different both need to be there. You got to have enough differences to make you grow, enough similarities to make you connect. But I don't think they're going to have exactly the same values. Over time, you may have overlapping values and maybe not focused on the differences, and there's wisdom in that. But I don't think you're going to find a relationship that's going to be like that. I think that's setting up a fantasy that you're going to have this. We're all going to always agree on things, and it's going to be similar values, and that's fantasy. I think you're going to be willing to endure a few battles along the journey too, because there's going to be a few of those too.
In our culture, there's a big push to find happiness. There are movies about it, books about it. What is happiness?
Well, I think that there's research that goes all the way back to even Aristotle and before him on what is happiness. And there's one that is like Jeremy Bentham describes as the most amount of pleasure. And another one is the most amount of meaning. And I think that the gradation of meaning over pleasure needs to have precedence. Because if there's no meaning in life and it's just about pleasure, then you could go out and eat sweets all day, make love all day, and just go do nothing and never really do anything that's meaningful. So I think that lasting fulfillment occurs not from immediate gratification of pleasure only. It comes from the combination of doing something that's meaningful, that's inspiring to you, that you feel you make a difference in. My observation, I've met a lot of wealthy people, and some of the wealthiest people, the most fulfilled people that are wealthy, are people that had something that they got up in the morning for that was really meaningful, that made a contribution. And the people that were probably the most unfulfilled, that were just getting up just to go have pleasure that day, and they usually ended up being old farts with young girls or drugs or drinking or whatever, and they were miserable. So I really believe that you need to have a nice blend between the pleasure seeking and the meaningful seeking. I think that true fulfillment, and I don't use the word happiness because happiness and sadness are kind of paired. I like to think that fulfillment occurs when you embrace both the pains and the pleasures and find something meaningful that you dedicate your life to. That's why it's important to fulfill what's highest on your value, because that's where you're most objective in reasoning, that's where you're most resilient and adaptable, that's when you're willing to embrace the pain and pleasure in the pursuit of something that is really meaningful to your life. So I think in search of meaning, as Viktor Frankl says, is a wiser approach.
There are also people out there that only want to have a happy, positive life in their interpretation, and anything that doesn't match with that, they cut it out, they avoid it, they ignore it. What do you think about that?
Well, that's like trying to get rid of your shadow or trying to get rid of the other side of a magnet. I don't think that's real. I think that's fantasy, and usually those people are the most miserable because they're, as the Buddha says, they're searching for that which is unavailable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable. And I think that the reality is that If you're trying to get rid of half of yourself or half of other people, you're probably going to be futile looking for that. You don't need to get rid of half of yourself to love yourself. You don't need to get rid of half of life to love it. I think that both of them serve. If you took all the, quote, challenging experiences out of our life, I don't think we'd have much going on. I mean, I innovate, create, learn, and stretch in those times. And when I'm getting nothing but ease and pleasure, I don't feel like I'm pushing myself. So you need both. I think you need both in life.
What is depression?
Well, I like to think of depression as a feedback mechanism to let you know that your expectations are unrealistic. Depression is a comparison of your current reality of what's going on to a fantasy about how you wish it would be or hope it would be or expect it to be. Anytime you expect things to be other than what they are, you're going to be depressed because what they are is what they are. So if you expect it to be something other than what it is, you're not facing reality. I'd rather find out what would be the benefit of what it is and how it serves me, and what would be the drawback of the fantasy, so I can release my fantasy that I'm comparing things to that's making me so frustrated. I'd rather go and get grounded in reality and say, hey, the magnificence of the way it is going to be greater than the fantasy you imposed on it.
So how can we do this? How can we ground this?
Well, the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. So if you ask the question, how specifically is what I'm experiencing going to help me fulfill what's meaningful to me and how does it serve me? And what would be the drawback of it was if it was the way I fantasize it should be? Just ask what's the drawback. If you can't find the drawback and say, well, there are no drawbacks, it'd be, well, then you have a fantasy. A fantasy is a positive without a negative. A nightmare is a negative without a positive. So if you have a fantasy you're comparing your life to, life is going to feel like a nightmare compared to something that doesn't exist. So if you can come up with as many drawbacks as benefits on the fantasy and bring it back down into reality, and as many benefits as the drawbacks as his, you calm it down. And that's the mastery of life, because otherwise you're going to be always angry at life because it's not matching your fantasy. And you're not even honoring that you're holding on to a fantasy. I see this all the time in relationships. Men or women have these ideas about how their spouses are supposed to be, and they keep punishing the person because they're not matching the fantasy, and they keep thinking that person needs to change, and they don't understand that the person's living according to their values and not the fantasy that you're holding on to. And that undermines the relationship. So you're destroying the relationship, comparing it to a fantasy. Nobody wants to be compared to a fantasy. They want to be loved for who they are.
And you take people through this in your Demartini method during your breakthrough experience.
Yeah, I face that every weekend in the programs, in the breakthrough experience. And sometimes I have couples there that both have complete delusionary expectations. I had a woman recently that was infatuated with her dad, and she had her dad on a pedestal, and her dad was just this most amazing guy. And so she was going to make sure that her husband turned into the dad. And the guy was similar to that, except with his mom. And they were totally different people. And he was expecting her to be a mom, and she was expecting him to be a dad. And the reality was neither one of them were that. So they were just fighting and fighting and fighting. And so we had to make them go and crack what were the downsides of the mother and father, because they had these infatuations. And infatuation is blindness to the downside. And therefore you resent somebody and get blind to the upside to balance it. So we went in there and cracked the fantasies on the mother and father in the program, and what were the downsides of them to break their illusion that they're always positive or always up or whatever, and always supportive. And then we looked at the benefits of the couple. And when we did, they started to have tears in their eyes of gratitude. And they started realizing that there was love there. And they were blocking their love, not because of their love, but because they were holding on to fantasies, infatuations.
How can this imbalanced perception affect our health?
Well, your wellness is wholeness and balance. And you can't have a balanced physiology without a balanced psychology. So as long as you're holding on to fantasies and you're in nightmares, you're splitting yourself apart. And the fantasy part activates the parasympathetic nervous system and affects certain physiology. And the other one affects the sympathetic nervous system, which is a fight or flight mechanism, which affects physiology. It causes distress, and distress is noted and associated with many, many illnesses. So distress causes cardiovascular issues, digestive issues, microbiome alterations, many times headaches and conflicts. I could go on. Your symptoms in your body are feedback mechanisms to make sure you set real goals in real times that are authentic. And if you learn how to extract the meaning out of illness, you realize that illness is actually a feedback to guide you.
What do you think cancer is? Is that related?
Well, it's interesting. I just did a presentation a little over a week ago on that. And I'm a believer that that's the last-ditch effort of your physiology to try to wake you up. And it's what happens is we regress and activate an ancient toolkit in our genetic makeup, epigenetically because of stresses that are going on and unrealistic expectations many times in our life that are activating these primitive genes that come online. They're the similar genes that occurred during embryological development and phylogenetic development in the world. And they're like what the scientists call metazoa 1, metazoa 2 junction, where single-celled organisms became multi-cell organisms back billions of years ago. And this toolkit gets them online, and these cells start to think that they're primitive. They start doing their job that way. And it's there as a mechanism to guide us back to love our family, to love ourselves, to get down to priorities. There's a whole lot of things that come out of it. That it helps us reprioritize what's really important to us. And sometimes we're martyring our life away or resentful to people or holding on to things which run our immune system down. And then you have other factors. You have radiation components that can alter DNA and cause aneuploidy. You could also have sometimes toxic elements that you've consumed by diet or maybe the jobs you're in. Or you could have shocking experiences or traumas that can activate this. There's a number of factors there. You can also have some genetic, and then sometimes, although questionable, sometimes infectious agents can be involved in it. There are viruses that are doing that. But they now, Arnold Levine at Princeton University have shown that sometimes those same viral components that are oncogenic in nature, we can create those without having to have a viral involvement. So we're questioning whether or not it's just a viral induced or the virus is concomitant with it and just happen to be associated with these events that go on in our life. But I really believe that it's been overlooked. The psychological component to cancer has been way overlooked. I've been involved in cancer research for many, many years, and I'm certain that that's overlooked.
Once you have cancer, can we balance our mind to help get rid of the cancer, or how do we look at the situation from that point forward?
Well, it all depends on the belief system, the values, the time, the type of cancer. If it's an aggressive cancer and you got weeks and it's just accelerating, you may have limited options. You know, the typical ways that they do in Orthodox medicine is they either cut it out, they either medicate it with some sort of a toxic material, or they radiate it and burn it out. You can, in some cases, come in from an alternative approach and try your best to balance out emotions and things. And there are certain cases that those have had spontaneous remissions and actually cleared. Some cancers are spontaneously remissive anyway. They just self-resolving. And some are so slow growing they're not even a concern. In fact, they just lowered the mammogram recently on when to do mammograms because they found out sometimes they were doing them and they were finding cancers, and then later they were finding they were gone. And so they're just now being more patient with them, which I think is smart. Same for prostates and some lung cancers. But I really believe that wiser is to do all the above, to have both an orthodox and an alternative approach viewed, and come in from the psychological components to reduce all the stresses as possible, because it helps the immune system. And then look at the progressiveness of it. If it's slow, you might be patient, be more alternative oriented, more conservative. If it's really aggressive and you've got days or weeks to potentially live, you might try something else. I think each case has to be thought through individually. But I think it's wise to have both a self-reflective component, a dietary component, a lifestyle component, and an orthodox component reviewed at the same time.
So all said and done, we live maybe 90 to 100 years if we're lucky, maybe more. Is there a collective purpose? Is there really, after everything is said and done, is there one thing that really just matters at the end of it all? Why are we here?
Well, I think that's been asked by philosophers for the ages. Plato said, for the sake of love. I think that's sufficient. If I asked people if you had only 24 hours to live, what would you do with your life? You'd say, thank you, I love you, to the people who've contributed to your life. I think that says it all. Gratitude and love is so empowering to all areas of life. It helps us in relationships, it helps us in business, socially, health-wise. I would say that for the sake of thank you, I love you is a good one. But it's the meaning we give it. If somebody makes a mountain out of a molehill or a molehill out of a mountain, it's their decision, it's their perception. So it's the meaning we give it, and our values will determine that. Whatever's highest on our value will be our meaning. Some people see the world as it's all a spiritual experience. Others see it as it's all a business experience. Some people see it as it's all economic. Some will say it's all about family. Our values will determine what's most meaningful to us, and they're unique, and everybody's got a different set of values. But ultimately, it's what we're grateful and we love in our life that boils down to.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Demartini.
Thank you. Appreciate it.